Welcome, everyone, to It's a Wrap with Rap. I am your host, Ron Rappaport. This podcast features people who have overcome life's challenges and adversities, people who can inspire and motivate, and people who can educate us on an assortment of topics. My guest today is Ari Gunzburg. Ari learned about death early in life. He experienced a traumatic moment when only 10 years old, when his teacher passed away while on a hiking trip. This would affect his life deeply and changed his perspective forever. Following the death of this teacher and rabbi, there was trouble afoot at school for all the traumatized kids. This created a domino effect of changes and decisions that all culminated in Ari getting his PhD from the School of Hard Knocks through multiple bad decisions and the outcome of those decisions. Having to live through these decisions and consequences has taught Ari many important life lessons, all of which he passes on to others. Learning and living past your mistakes. Regret not, but learn from your mistakes, says Ari, reminiscing the wild cycles he experienced during his misspent youth. Any lesson gained from real life experiences is the one you no longer need to learn in a formal education setting. Ari has had many life-changing experiences, each of which shaped him from trouble in school to going to unexpected places and more. Ari is now a motivational speaker, podcast host, and a wilderness liaison, as well as authoring The Little Book of Greatness, a parable about unlocking your destiny. Welcome, Ari, to the podcast.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure having you, Ari. Ari, can you tell us a little bit about your early years growing up before the age of 10 when the traumatic event occurred?
Yeah, absolutely. For the large part of it, so my family moved when I was about 5 to Baltimore, and I hit it off immediately with my next door neighbor at the time. And we happened to live in a little spot where there were, houses on one part, and right behind the houses was this condominium property with 2 buildings, and in between the 2 buildings was a forest, and our houses backed up into this forest. And I say forest, right? I mean, if as an adult we walked through there, my brother and I walked through there also to check and take a look. It's maybe it's an acre, it's, you could see from one end to the other easily, but as kids,
Yeah.
with the bushes around and everything else, it was massive. And it was just, we played games in there, we had adventures, and we built clubhouses, and we built this and we built that. And then it was really just a wonderful place to be able to grow up in, to have that freedom. And the stories that I could tell you from the different things that happened in there, from the time that a friend of mine was, I don't remember if we all were doing it or just he was doing it. He was throwing his bike down a hill to watch it roll down the hill by itself and everything. And
Yeah.
At one point in time, he ran over a beehive. We all went running to another time where we were all competing to climb to the top of this vine that was, maybe, I want to say 10 feet high, but maybe as an adult, if I looked at it, maybe I would say it's 6 or 7 feet high.
Yeah, I know how that is when you're a little kid.
And then, there was also a couple of times when I would walk through the woods, maybe by myself, and I would see a hawk. There is one clear, vivid memory, this hawk had grabbed a squirrel and was sitting on this vine, not so far away from the ground, and it had ripped it open and was just eating. And it was just tons and tons of memories like that. That just adventures and make believe and all sorts of things.
That really sounds like a great childhood.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. And then that event happened at 10, and shortly afterwards we ended up moving away from there, which was a pretty hard thing for me to go through and everything. The moving away, I'm saying, because that was my space. That was where I wanted to be. And
Sure.
And it's all right, you're not going to be there anymore. That was pretty hard.
So can you explain to us what happened on that school hiking trip, which was part of a larger field trip, I understand, when you were 10? And could you also tell us what you and your family's feelings about your teacher, rabbi that passed away, were?
Yeah, so I know we have a bit of a time limit, and I think you have a lot of questions prepared, so I'll try and give a Cliff Notes version a little bit. So we were on a field trip. There's a day in the spring that yearly people traditionally tend to go out, and maybe they make bonfires, maybe they do a barbecue, maybe they, whatever it is that they do. But a lot of times traditionally it's like bonfires and happiness and stuff like that, because it's we're getting up to summer. There's a lot of deeper other reasons there, but I'm not going to go into those right now. The main point is we were supposed to have one of those trips on the day of. The rabbi I think he had a doctor's appointment that day, or maybe it was bad weather. So we ended up pushing it off by 3-4 days. And so we're on this trip and we go to this park in Baltimore and we play baseball. And I don't remember if we ended up having the barbecue or if we were supposed to have the barbecue, but we hadn't had it yet. But in either case, we had played some baseball. We're about to go, we're hiking in the woods. We go hiking in the woods. And, like in the woods, the rabbi's like, look at the tree over there. Look how this system works with that. And look how this over here works. And he's just showing us all these amazing things about God's world.
Right.
And, after a little while, we were 10 years old. There's only 17 of us. There's only 17 kids. And this is back in the 90s when people were just a lot more relaxed about things. And, we were like, can we run ahead? He's like, yeah, go run ahead. Just stay on the path, whatever. And I was up ahead with a bunch of kids. We had found like a stream. We were waiting for everybody to catch up. And in the meantime, we were playing in the water. And then like some kids like came out from the woods. They like look down the hill, because like sometimes in the woods, like you'll have a hill you can kind of like see down. So they look down the hill at us playing in the stream, and they kind of like called out. They're like, guys, you got to come. Rebbe's hurt. And we're like, we ignore them because they've got to be joking. You in fourth grade, basically anytime anything like that happens, it's somebody pulling your leg.
Sure.
But after they kept on saying the same thing a bunch of times, we're like, all right, maybe there's something really going on over here. And we got up and we ran back, and the moment was like really surreal in my head. Like I still have like this vivid picture of it. There's 17 kids. Some of the kids are sitting down. Everybody's in shock. Some kids are sitting, some kids are standing. It was just sitting around. Like the rabbi's just laying on top of this bed of leaves. And one particular kid is completely hysterical. He's like sitting there kneeling, screaming at him. He's like, get up, what are you doing? It's not funny anymore. He's like screaming at the rabbi who's just lying down on the ground. And so we realized it was time to go for help. And so I and 3 kids were like, all right, we're gonna go this way. No, I and 2 kids, 3 of us went one direction, and then another 7 kids were like, you're going the wrong way, it's this way. And we're like, no, we're going the right way, it's this way. It was a little shouting match back and forth.
It was chaotic.
It was chaotic. It wasn't that chaotic. Like we weren't like coming to arms about which way to go, but it was kind of like, no, you guys go that way, we're gonna go this way, we'll find our way out of here. And so 7 kids stayed behind with the rabbi. And like we were trying to find our way out. It was like a hot day. And if you've ever been in Baltimore, it's like this mid-Atlantic mugginess that even in mid to late spring, you get that thick, heavy air, and it's just like so hard to like move and breathe. And we're like, we don't know what happened. We're like, was it the heat? Was it overexertion? So like we would like run because we're in this like panic mode. But then we'd be like, wait, guys, we gotta stop. We gotta take a break. We gotta like cool down, because maybe maybe there was the heat that was a problem. And so like we were kind of like half panicking, half stopping. It was like a weird situation. But we still didn't fully know our way out of the woods. And like off in the distance, we like heard this noise. We're like, well, what is that? And it started to like clarify into more like music. And we're like, oh, there's music. Okay, maybe it's a carnival, but in any case, like if there's music, there's people. And if there's people, there's help. So we got to go towards the music. So we started walking towards the music, and we get to the edge of the woods. And I often associate it with, it had to be God sat there and put this idea in this guy's head that day. Today's the day that you get dressed up and you go to the woods and you practice, because at the edge of the woods was a dude standing there wearing a kilt and playing the bagpipes.
No kidding.
By himself, just standing at the edge of the woods practicing. But from that point, when we came out of the woods and we see this guy playing the bagpipes, you could see off in the distance some buildings. So we ran over to the buildings, found some people inside the buildings. I later found out that it was, I believe, Outward Bound, because there's an Outward Bound campus on that park property. And we grabbed a couple of guys and we were like, yeah, something happened. So one kid stayed behind in case the other kids showed up.
Right.
And two of us led them back to the rabbi. And one guy got there and immediately started doing CPR to try and help him. And the other guy sat there and took the 9 of us that were left, right? Because there was 2 of
Right.
us went back and there were 7 kids left over, took the 9 of us that were left. And we're like, guys, come on, we got to go. We got to go. And he led us out of the woods and took us back over to the building. The other 7 kids in the meantime came out of the woods. So now you've got all 17 of us out of the woods. Our rabbi's in the woods. We have no idea what's flying. The school comes out, you know, some of the administrators and other people from the school, they come out to the park and they're like talking amongst themselves. And this is another like vivid memory that I have, is that, you know, we were kind of just standing around this massive tree trunk, watching them talking 20, 30 feet away. No idea what's going on.
Right.
No information, because they're not going to tell a bunch of 10-year-olds, hey, by the way, here's the outcome of the story.
Yeah.
So our teacher from the year before, whose van we had borrowed to go to this park, was like, everybody get in the van. And he wouldn't say a word to us. And he just was like, where do you live? And he would just drive that person home, get out. Where do you live? And he would drive that person home. And it was just, he like stone faced, wouldn't say a word. And we're like, I mean, terrified. We have no idea what's going on. We're like in shock. We're like, what's happening?
Right.
And so eventually he dropped me off, and my dad came home whenever he came home. I don't remember exactly. And I'm looking at my dad, and my dad's like, so, you know, what happened? Why'd you come home? I'm like, I don't know. And I told a little bit about what happened on the trip. And he's like, oh, let me call the school. So he picks up the phone and he calls the school. You know, you can hear him and like, hi, it's Dr. Gunzburg, my son, field trip, came home, whatever. And you could just, as he's talking to the person, like, I just want to find out what happened. Like, you could just look at his face and just watch everything just drop.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, just completely just crestfallen. And he hangs up the phone and he looks up at me just a few feet away and he's like, I'm sorry, he's gone. And we were in the kitchen at this old house we used to have. I think the kitchen, the foyer, one of the two. Like, I remember the linoleum floor. And he just like wrapped me up in this hug, and he just stood there for, I mean, what felt to me for like 45 minutes, an hour. It might have only been 3 minutes for all I know, but I'm saying we just stood there crying for like a long time.
Sure.
And you had asked before, like, you know, the reaction of my family and everything. So I don't fully know everybody's reaction. I know my dad, I think, felt close to him, certainly felt a level of gratitude and appreciation to him. And I'll explain. But part of the explanation is also explaining the greatness of the man that had left us, right?
Yeah. Right.
So at his funeral, I mean, I don't remember his funeral barely at all, but like, there were probably, if not thousands, there were certainly hundreds of people there, you know, students from the years that he had spent teaching and everything. They all came in from the different schools that they had gone off to and everything, and they drove down and they made sure to be there. You know, it was a massive shock to the community, because he wasn't an old man. He was 50 years old.
Wow. Wow.
You know, but one of the things that they had continued to reiterate was that he had passed away in the place that he would have wanted to have been in, which was in nature with his students, right?
Right.
Okay, but now getting back to what I had said about my family and the greatness. So he had affected a tremendous amount of people in their lives. He was an 8th grade rabbi, which it means that he was the rabbi for kids who were on their way into high school in religious Jewish culture. People going to Jewish boys going to high school in this portion of religious Jewish high school, which is called yeshivish, end up going off to a boarding school called a yeshiva. And you know, which school somebody chooses can have a tremendous effect on how well they do academically, how well they do in the different yeshiva studies, how well they end up. You know, it can change their life for better or for worse.
Sure.
And so he was a tremendous resource for people who were like, where do I send my kid now? He's going into 9th grade. Which school is going to be the best one for my kid? So people would constantly like ask him, okay, where should I send my kid? Where should I send my kid? And so there's a story that was written down in a book of like his memories from his life, where somebody said, you know, they called him up. They said, you know, where should I send my kid? He's like, I'm sorry, I don't know your son at all. Like, how am I supposed to recommend a school for your son when I don't know him?
Yeah.
And so the parents were like, okay, yeah, fine, no problem. But thinking that that was the end of it. But that wasn't the end of it. He said, so I'll tell you what, why don't we do some Talmudic studies in the evening for a couple of weeks, and I'll spend some time with your son. I'll get to know him a little bit. And once I know him a little bit, I can recommend what the best school for him is.
So he went out of his way.
Went out of his way. And like, there was never a case where he would be like, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. You know, it was always like, you know, what can I do to go above and beyond and really help out? And so
Right,
it
right.
turns out he actually was the one who was instrumental in getting my older brother into the 8th grade school that he went to, because he was having trouble with the schools in Baltimore. And so that's like, you know, so that my dad had an interaction with him in that case. And then also just one more story about this, like the greatness of him and everything is like,
Yeah, keep going. Yeah. No, it's really interesting.
I mean, this was a guy, like he had like, I forget exactly, 12 or 13 or 14 kids or something. So he had a large family, a lot of stuff going on and everything, and he still managed to find time for everybody else. He one time, a neighbor of his was like heading out on a weekend trip, and you know, as religious Jews, like people are timed, right? They have to be there by a certain time on Friday because that's when the Sabbath starts and the cutoff is, and you can't travel anymore.
Right, sundown.
Yeah, sundown, exactly.
Right.
So the person like was going to go and travel or something, and their car broke down. I don't remember if it happened, like if the car broke down on the highway or whatever. Maybe he like went to go pick them up or something. But in any case, he's like, "Oh, you guys were like going away, right?" They're like, "Yeah." He's like, "Here's my keys. Take my car. Go." They're like, "But your car, you need." He's like, "No, no, no, no. Get in the car. Go. We'll figure it out afterwards. Like, go and have your trip and everything." Like completely, totally selfless. And
Wow.
just, you know, just somebody who we can all try a little bit to emulate and elevate ourselves by doing so.
He sounds like a great guy.
Yeah.
How was the event a catalyst to many different struggles in the next 5 to 10 years of your life?
So I would say to some degree, it's a catalyst because it left a hole,
Yeah.
right? I mean, anything that we go through that's traumatic that we don't deal with. A friend of mine became, you know, at first he was a principal, and then I saw him a few years later. I haven't seen him in years, but like, uh, he became a principal, and then from a principal he went and he became a social worker. And I saw him at this event. You know, he's a much closer friend of my brother-in-law than he is of mine. You know, he's an ancillary friend for me. But he said something that was like tremendous. He was like, he explained, he's like, one of the biggest things that I learned is that, you know, we think like a traumatic event has to be a particular type of event. It has to be traumatic. It has to be
Yeah.
this. It has to be that. He's like, a traumatic event is whatever causes trauma for a person and then is not dealt with. So it could be the smallest thing in the world, but if it, for the person that it happened to, it was a big thing and it was never dealt with,
Right.
it's a traumatic event.
Sure.
And so I found that very, very enlightening. But anyways, this event was a traumatic event. We never properly dealt with it. I and the rest of the kids in the class, I don't think. At this point, maybe some of them have. And it leaves a hole. It leaves a big gaping hole in everything, and it has a tremendous effect in that way. Separately from that, and I would say probably more so than that. I mean, meaning we have this big hole, and that's what's going on over there. But then more so than that, I feel like there was this level of, I don't even know the right word for it, but level of neglect from the school for all the kids in the class because of, you know, how our schooling went for the next 3 years. And I wasn't there for 8th grade. I had left already by that point. So that was 4th grade. So for 5th, 6th, and 7th. So for 5th grade, they gave us a brand new rabbi who had never taught before. For 6th grade, they gave us a brand new rabbi who had never taught before. So meaning instead of being like, here's an experienced teacher who knows how to deal with kids and knows how to sit there and see when a kid is having trouble and knows how to do this and knows how to do that, they were like, no, here's a brand new one.
So there was no continuity.
No continuity and no safety net, really, I think is the best way to put that. I mean, now don't get me wrong, right? It's not that these two rabbis were bad. I'm saying at this point, they've been teaching in that school, I think, for 20 plus years, you know?
Yeah.
So clearly, they were on the path to being a great teacher, but at the time they just had no experience and everything. So it was
Yeah.
fifth grade and sixth grade, brand new rabbis. And then in seventh grade, they had done a mishmash of the class. So now it was like half the kids that had all this trauma happen to them a few years ago, but they had severe problems finding a teacher for the English studies. And we ended up with a teacher who was like a complete and total monster. I mean, I can't even tell you like stories because like I don't really remember them, but like it was just bad. I mean, one time I was trying to like reminisce, not in a good way or anything, but reminisce with a kid that I was in class with, and I was like, oh yeah, do you remember like in seventh grade? He's like, I shut that entire year out of my life. Like I won't even talk about it. I'm like, okay. And
Wow.
so they ended up with a lot major behavioral issues from the kids because the kids were going through like a really really bad time. I had gone to the principal like on my own, like, okay, like there's a problem, let me fix it. And I went to the principal, I said, I need you to put me in the other class, like just just switch my English class. And he's like, I can't do it. Nope, won't do it. It was just bad, and my parents weren't listening to me. They've since apologized, of course, not of course, but they've since recognized and apologized. But um so we had not an easy year for fifth grade. We had not an easy year for sixth grade, and then they gave us this like monster every year for seventh grade. And eventually they came up with this policy, a little bit ludicrous. Again, this is all happening in the 90s, so like
Yeah.
any normalcy.
We're
don't have any expectation.
going
I know
back,
it's
we're
probably
going
worse.
back, what, 30 years?
Not quite that much, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
20 something years.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know it was probably worse in the 70s, but like still, like nothing. Anyway,
Right.
they came up with an idea. They're like, if somebody gets kicked out of class 3 times, meaning the teacher says, get out of my classroom 3 times, you're suspended for a week. So I ended up getting kicked out a third time the week before Passover started. So they suspended me for a week, going straight into Passover vacation. Now it gets worse because they suspended me for that week, going into Passover vacation, and Passover vacation, that's when my bar mitzvah was. That's when my birthday was, my 13th birthday.
Right.
So here I am suspended for a week. Now it's my 13th birthday. Now but like I haven't been to school, and like Passover vacation is like 2-3 weeks long, depending on how the year lands. And so now it's like 3-4 weeks since I've gone back to school, and like now it's time to go back to school. My parents are like, okay, go back to school. And I'm like, no. And they're like, you need to go back to school. And I'm like, there's no way. And like it turned into a massive fight, including getting physically not violent, but like physical. And it was just like I put my foot down, and I was like, there's no way I'm going back to that school. And it caused a tremendous amount of issues inside of my own family. And then there was like the issues because like I'm kind of there, I'm kind of not there, and like it's also my bar mitzvah, so the kids are maybe supposed to come, maybe they're not supposed to. It was just really a weird moment and everything. And then like a month or so later or something, the school sent a letter to my house, and they're like, yeah, if you don't come by this in the state, we're going to expel you. And my parents maybe were freaking out, I don't know. I was like, dude, I left. You can expel all you want, I'm not there anymore. Like
You're
I'm
not
just
coming back.
yeah.
Right.
And then
Right.
thank God the other school, because there's not that many choices or anything, so the other school overlooked because a lot of times people are like, we don't want somebody who's been expelled, but like they overlooked the expulsion, and they brought me into the school. And I think I had a fairly successful 8th grade year. The only downside is that a lot of the kids that I was becoming friends with we were all kind of heading in the wrong direction. Like we were talking before the show started, you are typically the average of the people you hang out with the most.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so a lot of us were just making decisions. It seemed like great decisions at the time, but in retrospect, were decisions that were leading us in the way that we shouldn't necessarily go. But
Right.
great people, I'm friends with all of them to this day. But we were all just making decisions that were not necessarily best for us. And then so I had this gaping hole, and then those 3 years were just not very successful years. And then from just I mean I like to tell people, like, people are usually looking for some epiphany, like what were you going through in your life, and then all of a sudden, boom, one day you changed. one day you change this way, one day you change that way, right, for better, for worse. And
Yeah.
I try to tell people that in my viewpoint, I don't really see it as just a random epiphany that like happens all of a sudden. I mean, there could be people who will have that. I suspect more so that people will kind of create the epiphany. It'll happen. They'll create the epiphany afterwards and go back and attribute it all to this epiphany.
Yeah.
Um, with the exception of like a rock bottom moment, right? Like if
Right.
somebody's in an addict situation and there's a rock bottom moment, like that could easily be an epiphany moment. Like, holy crap, my life sucks. I got to change something.
Right.
Fine. But like, but I put it more to just kind of like more like an over underlying awareness over a long period of time that so you kind of like make these decisions that kind of like lead you kind of down the wrong path, and then you kind of have an idea of where you want to be in the future, and so you recognize you have to make a bunch of small decisions to build yourself back up to where you want it to be whatever it is that you're looking for, to be more productive, to be more giving, to be whatever growth you're looking for.
So it's a slow transition.
I find that baby steps is the way to go. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I was going to ask you, and I guess you kind of answered it, what kind of counseling was available to the class, but did they give you any counseling at all?
Not, I mean, so they did, but they didn't. They brought in somebody, I don't know who. I imagine it was probably somebody just fresh out of school, because it didn't seem like they had a lot of experience. They did 1, maybe 2 sessions with us. I'll give you an example. I mean, there's a much greater awareness for this need for grief counseling after like there's this massive traumatic event.
Right.
And in now that I'm thinking about it right this moment, like probably they should have sat there, and even if they had to find somebody to donate the money for it, whatever, they probably should have sat there and pulled every single kid out for minimum 10 sessions with somebody, so that, because like a lot of people are a closed book, especially after something like that happens, and you can't sit there and put 17 kids in a classroom in a little kids classroom, right, with a bunch of little baby toys with somebody who's not so experienced, and expect them all to just open up and have this like healing moment.
Right.
The reason I bring it up is because just the other day there was a reunion for one of the summer camps, and there was this tragic accident, and like a 15-year-old girl passed away, unfortunately. And so my niece was in that camp. She was at that reunion, and but like they're posting, the classmates are, here we're doing like this whole thing, and we're doing grief counseling. And even if you're not a classmate, we don't really care. If you have any questions, if you're struggling with this, anything, like show up at the school. There's people that can be there. There's gonna be like, teachers there. There's gonna be counselors there. There's gonna be this. That we're gonna deal with grief counseling. Like they're doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
But back in 1995, I think it happened 95. Back in 1995, like there's just, they brought somebody in once or twice for a couple times. They did a little bit, and that was about it.
The administration sounded like they just wanted to get it over with.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, you might put it that way.
I mean, just from an outsider standpoint. You started making some bad life choices after that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So there was a lot of alleged recreational use.
Okay.
I just, for anybody who's listening now and everything, this part wasn't on the recording or anything, but I told you before that there might come a time in the middle of this recording where my daughter might show up and everything, so I might just speak a little bit around the bush, but
Sure.
that's basically what's going on. So just read into whatever I'm saying, and read into it knowing that I'm meaning for it to be read into.
Got it.
The point is, okay, so there was a lot of recreational. Ended up getting into trouble a couple of times with a little bit more, nothing usually more than a slap on the wrist, but a couple days here, a couple days there, a couple days here, not from sentencing or anything, but just just in the moment, and boom, I wake up and I'm like, here again.
Right. Gotcha.
Stuff like that, and just being in situations where like things are going on, and this is happening, that's happening, and all of a sudden I wake up and I'm like, what the am I doing in a situation like
Sure.
this? I mean,
Yeah.
one that comes up vividly, and this I actually did have an epiphany about. I guess you call it an epiphany and everything, but it wasn't like what we were talking about before, where just everything just snaps, changes. Because I still don't really believe that happens. But like I was okay, so I'm in Brooklyn. This was at a time that I was in school in Newark, New Jersey. I was staying in Brooklyn. So I
Okay.
was hanging out with all these kids in Brooklyn, and I ended up, going with these kids, going with those kids, whatever. So I was hanging out with different friends of mine, and I ended up at this kid's house, and his mom was probably like mentally unwell, mentally unstable.
Right.
I don't know if his dad was around. If he was, who knows if he was mentally stable. And we're all sitting in the back, and we're all smoking, and his mom comes out, and she just starts screaming at him, right?
Yeah.
Now, this was a day when smoking was much more frowned upon than it is right now. Nowadays, like they're like everything's legal, in almost any state.
Yeah.
But I don't think that her problem was, if I recall correctly, it wasn't the issue wasn't like, oh my gosh, you're doing this thing, you're not supposed to be doing it. It was like other just stuff, and it was just like unhinged stuff. I mean, it was like insane, and like we're all just sitting there like, I mean, we're like 16, 17, right? All of us, maybe some of us are like 15 and stuff, and we're all just sitting there like, oh, what is happening around us? And I was sitting there, and I had this realization that like, okay, so like, meaning at first it was like, holy hell, like I can't believe it, like this is happening right now, and like I'm terrified, I'm like whatever, and like I just had this like realization that like, okay, so like, but like this is a guy I don't really know that well, it's not really like my friend, like this is the actual realization, the words were like, this is not my reality, like I'm living in this moment right now, but like the
Right.
fact is that as soon as I decide to be like, dude, peace, I'm leaving, I'm
Yeah.
out of here. Like his mom's not going to talk to me anymore. She's not going to yell anymore. Like she couldn't care less about me. Like it's just, I've got nothing to do with any of this. I just happen to be in a really uncomfortable situation where the mom's like flipping out at her kid. And I'm like,
Yeah.
And so that was the realization that like sometimes we put ourselves into these places or into these moments,
Right.
and we absorb all of the energy of the moment, sometimes for the better, most of the times that I'm talking about right now for the worse, right? We
Yeah.
absorb all this negative energy, and we like take it in, and we're like, oh no, like this is terrible, and all this stuff is happening, it's awful, and it's this, but like a lot of times it's not our reality that we're dealing with, and like we're just absorbing this like other energy that's coming in from the people around us, and so when we have this realization that this is the type of situation that we can pick ourselves up from and extricate ourselves from at any point in time, it becomes a lot easier to deal with said reality, because then you're like, okay, maybe I'm just thinking about this now, a decent example might be like, let's say plane flying on a plane. What's his name, Sean Accor, in like The Happiness Advantage, he talks about how there's like this noted study that if you show up to like, maybe he says it in his speech, but like you show up at like the waiting area for a flight,
Yeah.
and you act all fidgety and all antsy and everything, and you're like all
Yeah.
nervous and stuff, you
Yeah.
will make literally everybody in that area antsy, fidgety, and nervous, because people like absorb the things that are going on around them.
Right.
And
Right.
when he's talking about it, he jokes. He's like, "Don't do this on your flight. Do it on the flight next door." you know. But the point is like, if the stewardesses are having a bad day, if the plane is like a little bit turbulent or whatever, right? Like, unless you fly a lot, like, okay, so you had a bad flight, right? But like, it's not gonna. It shouldn't necessarily ultimately change your life forever. Like, it could be like, okay, like it's really hard to be on that flight, but it's not my reality, because as soon as the flight's over, like the next time I'm getting on a plane, it's in 2 weeks, and 6 weeks, and 12 months, whatever. Like, but meanwhile, a lot of people, like, planes are just like really really hard to be on, so that'll be a great example. But the point is like, we can be in many situations, a coworker that's sitting there and complaining about something happening at home, and like we just like absorb all that negative energy, and we're like, oh, like all of a sudden
Right.
all our stuff is going crappy. Like, that's not your reality necessarily. I mean, you can maybe commiserate a little bit, and you can maybe sit there and be empathetic a little bit, but you have to be able to like create that separation between you and whatever's going on.
Ari, what lessons did you learn from the negative lifestyle you were pursuing?
Um, to strive for things that are better, to strive for better things, to look for the positive in everything.
Okay.
And that doesn't always come right away. There are times when we are going to be in these situations and we're going to be looking at the negative, and that's all we can see. And that's okay. That's not okay to live there, but that's okay. What you have to kind of do is try and find the positivity in things, because there's always a positive to it. There's always an aspect of it that, that can really change your outlook and everything. There's so many lessons I'm trying to just like compact into like small things. I don't know.
But look for the positive. What was the turning point for you to get on the right pathway? What was that turning point?
As we were talking about before, like it's a lot of baby steps, certainly.
Right.
But I feel like I was also telling you briefly, I feel like I went through a lot of healing in many, many ways. When I ended up in this house. I was living in one place, I was living in another, like whatever. I had a girlfriend for a little bit. She's like, you got to get out of your place you're in right now. Truth is, maybe I shouldn't have listened to her, but whatever. Meaning, whatever. Long story. But like it worked out for the best, even though like I broke up with her shortly after, because I ended up in this house with a whole bunch of Yemenite Israelis in there. So they're just like very culturally different than Americans. But
wait, was this in New York?
It was in Baltimore.
In Baltimore, okay.
Yeah, so like friends of mine who ended up, because like a lot of what would end up happening is like a lot of Israelis that were in on visas would come and hang out at the house, and a lot of our friends would come and hang out at the house. So like my friends used to call it like Little Israel. Yeah, because there was a lot of Israeli culture happening, and like a lot of like not clashing but mixing of cultures.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I've always felt close to Yemenites because growing up, a close friend of my parents is Yemenite. I mean, I think she's pretty much a lot more Americanized than these guys were, but like, she's very Yemenite. She married an American guy, but she's like super Yemenite and everything. So like, I grew up and like, it's funny. Like her daughter, I went to visit one of her daughters when I was in Israel, like during the year that I was living in that house. And her daughter's like, you gotta try this chicken soup. It's the best chicken soup. It's got, I think it was like cumin or something. She's like, it's Yemenite chicken soup. You've never had something like this in your life. And she serves it to me. I'm like, I have this all the time. She's like, what? But so I had already had that like kinship, that feeling of a connection with Yemenites. And then I ended up in this house, and like I'm like this little baby, and the guy who brought me in, who's a few years older than me, he moved out of the house, and so now it's like mostly just me and a bunch of these Yemenite Israelis. And I brought another friend of mine into the house. It was like two American kids that are both like 19, 20, and a bunch of these like Yemenites who were mostly like 30, 31, right?
Okay, so they were older than you.
Much older. And so like, and it was funny because like one of them didn't speak spoke only a few words of English, and I only spoke a few words of Hebrew, but like he was the one that I ended up feeling like I had the closest connection to. Because if you've never experienced it, it's hard to explain, but if you have experienced it, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? There's some people you might just be on the same wavelength with. Right. With just a couple of words and like a lot of exaggerated hand motions and a lot of laughing, you can have like these whole conversations and like get this like real connection to somebody that you can't speak a word to. And that I feel like that happened a number of times with him. Like, and like it would also be like, I mean, at the time I smoked, so like it would be, there was just like this constant like taking care of that was happening. Not like a severe nurturing like that would happen with like a more like I always liken it to like an older brother, right? Like I'd be like, hey, let me kind of bum a cigarette, I'm all out. And he'd like reach into his drawer, pull out a pack and throw it to me and be like, here, just take a whole pack, They would like bang on my door at 7:00 in the morning and be like, what are you doing today? And I'm like, dude, go away. And they're like, are you doing anything today? Or like, are you on shift at the places that you're working? And I'm like, no, go away, I'm trying to sleep. And they're like, get in the van. I'm like, what? They're like, get in the van, you have to come work. I'm like, I don't want to work. They did like moving stuff and everything, right? They would like had a moving company. Yeah. I'm like, I don't want to work. I'm like, I want to sleep. And they're like, get in the van, you're coming with us. I'm going here, he's going there. There's nobody speaks English. You got to go speak English for the customer. I'm like, fine. I mean, they paid me, of course, like so, but like they knew that I was like working part-time and everything by choice. Like a lot of times I was in school, but while I was there, but they knew that I was like, and they knew that I could use the money and not in a bad way, and they weren't forcing me or anything, but it was just like an older brother would sit there and be like, dude, you got to come work with me today,
Yeah, they're trying to
like,
help you. They're trying to help
yeah,
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
and helping themselves. I mean, it
Yeah.
wasn't, but it was like a good relationship and everything. It was just like, and then there's also like, I feel personally like there's a lot of cultural things in American culture, uh, certainly back then, maybe still today, that like there's certain cultural attitudes that America has that are maybe, let's say that they're a little bit less healthy than more European or more Middle Eastern, more
Mediterranean.
Mediterranean. That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
Than like the more European Mediterranean culture. And
Right.
so like when I was like living around them all the time, and I saw this like interaction that was more of a Mediterranean interaction, like it healed, I think, to some level, certain parts of myself where I was like, okay, like that, and like it just, I don't know. I feel like it was like a year that just like helped me tremendously and everything. And
It got you into a good groove.
yeah, I have a lot of gratitude. I have a lot of gratitude for them. Nothing, it wasn't fixed after that or anything like that, but certainly I was doing much better
Yeah.
after that.
Yeah.
That's certainly some time that I can look at and be like, yeah, like things certainly started to turn around then.
Ari, when did your entrepreneurship journey start, and how did that come about?
My entrepreneurship journey is a can of worms in and of itself. It started in 2007, and
Okay.
it's been a wild journey. Like, I have not had any. A lot of entrepreneurs will sit there and be like, especially people who want to go speak, will be like, "Yeah, I had this company, I sold it for this much, and I had this, and I sold it for this much." I haven't made any of those things happen yet. I've done a tremendous amount of learning and brainstorming, and like there's certain things that I've always, I guess the best way to put it is like that I've missed, in the sense that like, if you do like personality assessments, right? There's all different types of people out there. And so, when you have like an ideas man, like Elon Musk or whoever, like they're able to get to the point of that by surrounding themselves with people who are the implementators, right?
Right.
And so I've not yet fully successfully surrounded myself with like the implementators to sit there and get my many ideas up and off the ground, like fully up and off the ground, and then operational and everything. But I mean, entrepreneurship is a roller coaster, and it's a journey, and I'm still on it. I've got a number of projects that I'm like working with different people to get them implemented. Because again, I've recognized this weakness. What I don't know. Weakness maybe is not a great word. Whatever. Let's just say weakness. There might be a better word for it, but I've recognized that I have this strength in coming up with ideas and ways to implement it and ways to work it out, but this weakness in the sense that like, shiny object syndrome plus the other things that are going on. So it's so I'm trying to like sit there and offset that weakness with people who have that strength, and they have that weakness and I have my strength, so we can sit there and turn it into like a real team. So there's a number of projects that I'm working on like that right now that God willing will hopefully turn into different things. And then there's also, you had mentioned the speaking before and everything, but obviously, as you can imagine, with COVID, speaking is a little bit of a
Yeah, it's
a
a
little
little
bit of a
challenge
lower
now.
industry. Yeah, it's a little challenging. It's a challenging industry to be in right now. So I'm kind of like biding my time as the events industry slowly starts to come back and everything. But we keep on going through the roller coaster of,
Yeah. Yeah. That's for
without going
sure.
into too much detail. But yeah, the roller coaster of it is certainly making it challenging. But I'm fairly confident within 1 to 3 years or so, like the events industry hopefully will be back to normal and everything. We'll get past some of the craziness and some of the roller coaster of events and everything, and get
Right.
back to a little bit more stability.
Ari, how do you use your life experiences when you speak to these corporations and other groups of people? How do you use those life experiences?
I use them in the way that makes the most sense at the time. So one of the things that I was just telling a potential client the other day, because we were talking about a charity event that she wants me to come speak at. And I was explaining to her, because she was telling me that one year they had this particular type of guest, and they were amazing because they came in and they were like really interesting. And then another year they had a motivational speaker come in, and the motivational speaker just wanted to come in and give a motivational speech. And that's not what they'd ask for. They'd say, we want you to come in, we want you to tell your story, explain how how this particular project came about. Like, we're not hiring you to be a motivational speaker, we're hiring you to be an interesting speaker at our luncheon. And the person came in and they're like, okay, everybody take these sheets, and now we're gonna write her name down like this, and let's all like, yeah, rah rah, sis kumbah. And they were like, oh no, like it was the wrong venue for like a super motivational speech, because they were like, that's not what we're here for. We're here to like have like a nice interesting luncheon for a fundraiser, and that's it. But what I was telling her is that my number one goal is to make sure that anything that I speak about, any experience that I give, is the absolute best experience that I can possibly give for your event. So if that means at a holiday party one time, they wanted to focus on a life with purpose, so I crafted an entire speech based on my stories, based on my materials, about living a purpose-driven life. Another time, people wanted to hear my stories, so I crafted a speech with a good message with the story. And so it's really about what's going to make the most sense, and it's not about me, although I use my own experiences and my own stories to make it more interesting and to make it more relatable. Like if you read books about speeches, there's a particular book that I'm thinking of, the Walk Like Lincoln, Stand Like Churchill, or something like that. So he says that he says straight out, he's like, take a story, I don't care who it happened to, but make it happen to yourself, because that's the only story people care about. Meaning he's basically saying like, lie about it, because I don't know like the right way to put it, but almost like lie about it because that's the way people connect to it. And I have to figure out like for myself how to do that, because I'm not comfortable like lying. So like maybe there's a way to like tell it in first person, and then afterwards be like, by the way, that story didn't actually happen to me, it happened to. But
Jazz it up.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
You gotta create pictures in people's minds, right? Because that's what we're doing as speakers, is we're trying to create a running movie in somebody's mind, so that they sit there and absorb and understand and connect and get to it. But anyways, yeah. So my most important thing is to make sure that it makes sense for them, and so I do tell stories from my own life, but that's not the point. The only point of that is to make it more interesting and make it more relatable. But the main point is that I work with the event planner to make sure that it's the best thing. Like another example was, this company was going through a major merger, and there was a lot of stuff going on, and like there was a lot of people who were like super concerned, and there were like all these obstacles that people had to get through, and the people weren't necessarily going to be mentally prepared for. And so I literally came in there and I gave a speech about overcoming obstacles, turning obstacles into opportunities, and just presenting, because it was like, okay, you guys are going through this big merger, and everybody's terrified and everybody's going on like this, like let's talk about that. And that's what we did.
You have what you call 5 keys to greatness. Can you talk about them and who inspired them in you?
Yeah, absolutely. So in retrospect, I like to say that the rabbi that we spoke about before, that he inspired them. At least the concept of looking to achieve greatness, right? If not these specific keys. The 5 keys to greatness, just to plug a little bit, is the subject of my book, The Little Book of Greatness, that you had mentioned before.
Yes, it's a parable, by the way, for everybody out there. I believe it's available. It's a parable, right?
Yeah, it's written as a parable. It's a short read. If you put it into a calculator, it tells you about how long it takes to read. It says just over 3 hours. And obviously there's people who read faster, people who read slower. That's okay. And what was it? Oh, so since I think that you wrote that bio, like it's won a number of awards as well.
Yeah.
And so like the people who read it love it. It's really cool. But like it's just following a guy on a journey while he learns about these 5 keys to greatness. The 5 keys to greatness are, in a very brief nutshell, and that's
yeah. I don't want you to give the book away.
No, not even giving the book away, like whatever. If people, I like to say, if people want to figure it out, like they can go read through the reviews. People have like written them out in the reviews. They can find it. Like you can download the first 2 chapters on my website, littlebookofgreatness.com, and in the table of contents, it says what the keys are. So there's still a tremendous amount of information you can get by reading it. But like to get the overview and to get the idea, and then you can just think about it on your own. You can contemplate it and figure new things out. But basically, the way to remember them is the word great, G-R-E-A-T, the 5 keys to greatness, the word great, G-R-E-A-T, and that's give, reason, amazing. Oh no, sorry, E first. Give, reason. It's been a long
Amazing.
day. No, amazing is A. It's presence, but it's an E word for presence. Engage, that's what it is, sorry. Give, reason, engage, amazing, and tenacity.
Tenacity.
So it's about being able to being more giving, to providing more, and that could be anything. That can mean money, that can mean time, that can mean compliments, that can mean a smile. I mean, you can just continue thinking about ways to be a giving person, and that applies there. And I did a lot of thinking about this stuff, and almost anything that you might be like, but what about this and this and this? And I'll be like, no, it fits into this key, right?
Right.
So these are kind of like, overarching concepts that other things fit into, and it's a framework. I like to call it a framework as opposed to a system. A lot of people give you listen to my system and you'll become an amazing person. Step 1, do this. Step 2, you need another notebook to take notes on the first notebook, because the first notebook wasn't enough to take notes from the book and everything in order to be able to implement the system. And it's just so complicated and so hard to put into play that like it's really hard to use in your life. So I like to call it a framework. Just think of these 5 keys, think of areas in your life that you can improve in these 5 areas, and then just try and implement it. So it's give, reason is to create a purpose for living, and you can use that in major areas of your life. The typical would be work and home, but somebody who has additional major areas of their life, if they, let's say, do a lot of exercise, they can go ahead and create a purpose for that, or whatever would be applicable for somebody's life. Engage is to be more present in the present moment, and that's incredibly hard nowadays because of cell phones and social media and things like that. So that's something to always think about. A is for amazing. That's what we talked about before, using more of a positive mindset with your life. And T is for tenacity. Something's hard, something's not working, just keep at it and keep going and be persistent, and it's going to come.
What tips do you have for people dealing with unfortunate life circumstances such as addiction, death of a loved one, divorce? What tip do you have for dealing with it?
I mean, it's just really hard to be going through things like that. So there's no real tip that's going to be like, poof, all your problems are gone. That's just not the way that the world works. I think the best thing to think about is that life is kind of like a roller coaster, right?
Right.
Or if you don't use the roller coaster analogy because it's fast moving, let's say more that like life is kind of like walking through the mountains. There are times that we're going up and there are times we're going down, but just because you're going down doesn't mean you're always going to be going down. There will come a time, because we're not walking on flat earth, we're not walking straight downhill, we're walking from a mountain into a valley back up to a mountain. So even if it feels like, to quote scripture, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, right?
Right.
So we can be in a terrible moment, in a very, very dark moment, with a lot of things that are very, very hard, very, very bad happening, but it gets better. There's almost always a light at the end of the tunnel. And, sometimes, you also hear stories about people who went through different things, people who get sick and they get cancer, they're on death's door, and they come out of it and they're like, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Now, I'm not wishing that on anybody. I'm not wishing it for myself. Nobody should really know of those things. But the people who do go through those things, a lot of them end up getting far more contemplative, far more appreciative of the small things. And so when we're going through those really, really hard moments, I mean, just, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's an up to every down. There's things coming around.
Ari, you are a WFR, which is a wilderness first responder, and you're also a wilderness liaison. What prompted you to pursue that endeavor, And can you just briefly describe those two jobs for us?
Sure. So neither one of them are really are really a job. I call myself a wilderness liaison because I'm not a wilderness guide. A wilderness guide would be well versed in a particular type of terrain or activity, and specifically take people to those things. I like to advocate for getting people outdoors, and so that's why I outdoors into nature, into the backcountry, etc. So that's why I like to call myself a liaison. I'm trying to, so like if you wanted to go whitewater rafting, but you didn't know what to do, or you were a little bit afraid to go, I would say, great, let's get a group together and I'll go ahead and do all the arrangements. I'll cover all the logistics. I'll cover all of this. And we'll do like a, multi-day whitewater rafting trip, or we'll do a trip that has rafting and caving, or we'll do this. Like I ran a camp over this past summer and I got kids out into nature. I got them into caving. I got them into whitewater rafting, hiking, just different cool outdoor backcountry nature things. And then as far as the wilderness first responder, before I got it, it's been a dream of mine for a long time. I think I wanted to move. I think I didn't realize it, but I wanted to be in the outdoor space ever since I was a kid, like you asked before, and I was playing in that forest behind my house. And then after ninth grade, maybe I was 14 or so, so I got to go on an outward bound trip, and that was like sailing and rock climbing up in Maine, and it was like just absolutely fantastic. And I really wanted to go into that field. But my recreational use, I believe my recreational use got in the way of that. And also like just different things. Like maybe if I'd sat down with somebody who knew what they were talking about, they would have like pushed me to go with my woofer back then. That's how you call it, a woofer.
Woofer,
It's it's just a medical certification to be able to help people medically out in the backcountry. It's just below EMT, but you can't use it in the front country. Like I was like saying to my teacher, I'm like, yeah, if somebody's bleeding out in front of me in like a hotel, he's like, can't do nothing. Pick up the phone, dial 911. I'm like, but like in the middle of the backcountry, he's like, then you treat him.
Yeah, gotcha. Too bad somebody didn't have that back when you were 10, when that event happened. Yeah,
that is true. But even then, in retrospect, if I recall correctly, they said that he was dead before he hit the ground.
Yeah.
He just had, I guess it was probably a heart attack, although I don't remember them using those words, but like he just had a massive whatever he had, and he was gone before he hit the ground.
Ari, what excites you the most going forward in your work?
I'm working at creating my entrepreneurial setup to be able to be out in nature more. I've got a few projects going on that I'm working on, that as I launch each of these projects, and hopefully I have a team in place to take care of each one of them, that they will allow me, first of all, the justification, and second of all, the resources to be able to be outdoors much more. As I mentioned before, I ran a camp over last summer. I'm planning on doing that again this summer. Just giving teens the opportunity to just enjoy the great outdoors. I find that nature, this is one of the reasons why I'm such an advocate for being outdoors. Nature has such tremendous healing powers that people don't realize and people don't recognize. If somebody's feeling stressed, I dare you to go for a 30-40 minute walk out in the woods. And that doesn't mean backcountry, dangerous area. Like you can find a city park somewhere, and depends on the city.
Yeah.
But like, I'll give you an example. I used to live in Cleveland, so I was near Beechwood, and in Beechwood, there's this park in between two parts of this road called Shaker Boulevard. Right, it's not a big park. It's maybe like 300 feet across, but there's a pathway, and it's what do you call it? It's paved, right?
Yeah.
But you feel almost like you're in nature. Go walk in there for 30-40 minutes and everything, and tell me how you feel afterwards. Tell me if you haven't at least figured out some of your problems, or at least feel better, feel more relaxed, feel more anything. Nature's got just a tremendous ability to heal our soul.
I couldn't agree with you more. I had just taken some trips to Utah.
Oh, nice.
Zion National Park, and Bryce, and Moab up in Arches, and then South Dakota, the Black, what was it? Not the Black.
Black Sea or something.
The Badlands. And you feel, it just makes you feel so much more in tune, with everything. It's fantastic.
I'm beefing up on my backpacking stuff so I can be like even more comfortable, because I'm trying to get my buddy to come out with me to Shenandoah for like some winter camping. if once I've got the rest of the gear and everything to be fully warm, because the last time I went winter camping, I borrowed some of the gear, so like I'm almost finished filling up the gear to be nice and warm and toasty in my tent overnight. And I just spoke to him the other day, and he's like, I'm down. So like we're gonna try and figure something out.
That's great. How can people contact you, Ari?
The best way to get in touch is my website, arigunz.com. That's ARIGUNZ. It's guns with a Z, so ARIGUNZ.com. And that'll take you to my main website and all the different ways to get in contact with me. Please feel free to reach out. I'm also on Instagram, same thing, Ari Gunz, at Ari Gunz. And definitely, I'm not really on Instagram that much, but if you reach out, I'll eventually see. Like I was saying before,
I know you
social
will.
media.
I know you will, because I reached out and you did get back to me. So yes.
Yeah, no, I
He
mean,
will get back to you.
I don't love social media, but I do have some of the profiles, and I'm trying to find somebody to kind of like take the horns on it. Although that's a big no to say, so don't tell anybody.
I will listen. I will
But
listen.
just to be able to like be active without actually using my own brain, because it's I don't think social media is healthy. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
So to be able to be active for the business purposes without like
Sure.
losing the brain space that you lose when you're doing it for yourself and everything.
Yeah. I'm going to list that in the podcast notes. Thank you so much, Ari, for being
Absolutely.
on the
Appreciate you having
podcast.
me on. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for being on the podcast, for sharing your story with us. It was so inspiring hearing how one of life's traumatic events led to positive things happening for you in the end. Your story will give others hope and encouragement. I wish you all the best going forward. Comments and suggestions to improve the podcast, please email us at itsarapwithrap@gmail.com. Our website is itsarapwithrap.com. We have a Facebook page and a Facebook group, It's a Rap with Rap. We're on Instagram, It's a Rap with Rap podcast, and all the episodes are on YouTube. It's a Rap with Rap, the podcast uncut. Thanks everyone for listening, and please stay safe. And for now, it's a wrap.